Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. While Faiza Ali, my co-author, and I have been unable to attend the Academy of Management conference this year due to some reasons, we thank organizers of this symposium to provide us with this opportunity to present via this video presentation. The presentation is based on our study in which we investigate sexual harassment at workplace in Pakistan. The study was primarily conducted by Dr. Faiza Ali, my colleague, at the Suleiman Dawood School of Business, Lahore University of Management Sciences. She is the first author and the principal investigator. The title of the paper is "This is an Invisible Violence which we have to face everywhere." This is a study which was conducted in Pakistan. In terms of outline of this presentation, first I would explain the aim of the study. I will then explain the theoretical background, in particular the newest institutional lens which we use in this study. I will explain the significance of the context, the Pakistani context, will briefly explain the methodology, which will be followed by findings, discussions, and in the end, some implications for future research and practice. So in this paper, we examine how traditional gender stereotypes in this South Asian Muslim majority country, that is Pakistan, influence sexual harassment in the workplace. Now I move to the theoretical background. Sexual harassment, as defined by Equal Opportunities Commission in 2005, is unwanted conduct of a sexual nature or other conduct based on sex affecting the dignity of women and men at work, which may include physical, verbal, and non-verbal conduct. Studies on sexual harassment have largely focused on outcomes experienced by direct targets of sexual harassment, or such studies have been conducted on definitions and theorizations of harassment in different organizational and industrial contexts. Differences in religion and culture, we argue in this paper, they affect the perception of harassment in various countries. Sociocultural factors influence the perception of harassment, and hence it is important to consider these factors while exploring sexual harassment in any country. So in this specific paper, we use an institutional lens. Neo-institutional theory suggests that employees bring their own beliefs, norms, and traits to the workplace. A neo-institutional perspective suggests that instead of acting under rules or policies, individuals such as managers and employees act because of conceptions, their own approaches and perspectives. The theory is helpful in understanding the nature and impact of societal norms on stakeholders, including organizations, employers, and employees. So within the theorization of sexual harassment, we believe context is important. So Toker and Sumer in 2010, their study of perceptions of workplace sexual harassment in the Turkish context, it highlights unique themes, which are to the Turkish context and distinct as compared to the US context. Similarly, Siddiqui's study in 2003 in Bangladesh, it was found that the most common form of sexual harassment identified in the study of factory workers was gali, or expletives to which women are subjected to during work hours. There is also a comparison from an institutional or legislative perspective of laws against sexual harassment in Muslim majority countries and Western countries. For example, in the US, sexual harassment law was passed, and sexual harassment was prohibited back in 1980. A similar law was passed in Australia in 1984 and in the UK in 1993. In Muslim majority countries, this is a relatively recent phenomenon. In Turkey, this law was passed in 2004, in Bangladesh in 2009, and in Pakistan in 2010. This specific study, empirical study, was conducted in Pakistan. Pakistan, as some of us know in this room, is a male-dominated society. It has a low female participation in economic activity. There are limited occupational choices for women owing to social and cultural constraints, inherent gender bias in the labor market. Nearly 80% of the working women in Pakistan, according to an estimate, they are subject to sexual harassment of various forms. And indeed, this context has to be considered when studying sexual harassment at the workplace in Pakistan. So what exactly did we do? We conducted interviews, qualitative interviews with 30 female employees in Pakistan. Venue was Lahore. 3 sectors were identified: banking, education, and telecommunication. And the analysis was conducted through in vivo to identify recurring themes and codes. So within our findings, working women's experiences and perspectives related to sexual harassment at work, we identify 2 key sets of issues: socio-cultural issues and institutional issues. So from socio-cultural perspective, we were able to identify 3 key sub-themes, which are female modesty, shame, and inhibition. And we argue, based on these findings, that female modesty, or the notion of female modesty, according to Pakistani culture and local practice of Islam, and also the local notion and practice of shame and inhibition, they have a major influence on the way sexual harassment is perceived within Pakistani context. So for example, one of the participants, she said, in our culture, it is considered a shame to openly discuss sexual harassment, especially for unmarried girls. Our culture is like that. If something like this happens, people will not say anything to the man, but they will blame the girl as the main culprit behind such issues. The second issue which was identified in this research was to do with institutional issues. And within institutional issues, there are 4 sub-issues which relate to lack of awareness of legal and organizational procedures of sexual harassment, such as redress. The second issue is managerial bias and discretion, which often acts against women. The third issue is resistance and individual agency of women. And the fourth is when some of these women are subject to victimization. So a couple of quotes I would like to share with you. One quote is by a woman who says that this is an invisible violence which we have to face everywhere. It is everywhere. In my previous organization, there were more than 60 employees, and there were things such as putting up with offensive remarks against women. Similarly, another participant said, "We cannot stop customers from staring at us. That is a problem everywhere, and it is sort of a manufacturing fault here in Pakistani society." So when we look at both of these issues in conjunction of each other, the socio-cultural issues and the institutional issues, we come to conclude, and also keeping in view the Pakistani context, we come to conclude that despite provisions of gender equality and anti-harassment laws in Pakistan, the implementation of such laws in practice is really weak. At the socio-cultural level, societal and religious attitudes, norms and practices such as female modesty, shame, and inhibition, they contribute to women's vulnerability to sexual harassment. At the institutional level, there is a lack of awareness of legal rights to deal with gender equality and sexual harassment. This lack of awareness is further complicated by a lack of enforcement of anti-harassment and pro-equality laws at multiple levels, including within organizations. So, organizations and managers, including human resource managers, they seem to practice their discretion based on individual gender bias. So, in terms of implications for research and practice, government and non-government organizations, as well as business sectors, they may work together to reform gender discriminatory attitudes embedded in the society and the workplace. Policymakers and managers, they need to take into account the sensitive nature of experiences and charges of harassment. Organizations may consider designing and implementing adequate procedures to curb harassment in the workplace, and there would be interventions needed at macro, meso, and micro levels. And indeed, progress of such legislation and its enforcement would need to be monitored through independent bodies. In conclusion, we reiterate that the incidence of sexual harassment at work, it seems an invisible crime which needs to be highlighted, considered, and addressed at two interconnected levels, that is sociocultural and institutional. Thank you.